Daniel Peterson turned off his phone for the 10th time that morning and stared fixedly at the spreadsheet that could destroy his company or save it forever. At 35 years old, CEO of the largest logistics startup in the United States, he faced the most important decision of his professional life. On the table in front of him, two proposals had arrived the same week, after 6 months of crisis that nearly drove Peterson Logistics to bankruptcy. First proposal, Amazon offering $85 million to buy his company, enough money to pay all debts, guarantee the future of his 300 employees, and make Daniel a multimillionaire at 35. The offer would expire in 48 hours. Second proposal, a group of Middle Eastern investors offering $20 million in investment, but keeping Daniel as CEO and allowing the company to remain American independent. The problem? They wanted to use a logistics network to transport diverse products, and Daniel suspected some of these products weren't exactly legal. "Mr. Peterson," said Sandra, his assistant, knocking on the door, "3 more calls from Amazon arrived, and Mr. Khalil is awaiting your decision about tomorrow's meeting." Daniel ran his hands through his hair. 6 months ago, his life was simple. The company was growing 40% annually. He had just married Marina, and they dreamed of having children. Then came the recession. 3 major clients canceled contracts simultaneously, and a cyber attack cost $6 million in fines and compensation. In 6 months, Daniel went from successful entrepreneur to desperate man. "Sandra, cancel all afternoon meetings. I need to think." "Mr. Peterson, may I say something?" "Of course. You haven't slept properly for 3 days. You're making an $85 million decision with a tired head. That's not smart." Daniel smiled for the first time that week. Sandra had worked with him for 5 years, since the company had only 12 employees in a small office in Austin, Texas. She was more than an assistant. She was counselor, friend, and the only person who had the courage to confront him when necessary. "Sandra, I need wisdom. I need to know which decision is right, and I have no idea how to figure that out. Mr. Peterson, may I suggest something that will sound strange? At this point, any suggestion is welcome. Have you ever tried praying about it?" Daniel looked at Sandra as if she had suggested consulting an oracle. "Praying? Sandra, you know I'm not religious." "I know, but I also know you're desperate. And when we're desperate for wisdom, sometimes it's worth exploring sources we would normally ignore. Do you really think prayer can help me choose between Amazon and Arab investors?" "Mr. Peterson, 5 years ago you hired me because I had exceptional intuition for people, remember? You said I could read situations others couldn't." "Yes, and you never disappointed me." "Then you can trust me when I say this intuition comes from somewhere, and that place is prayer." Daniel remained silent, processing the information. "Sandra, do you pray about business decisions?" "I pray about everything, Mr. Peterson, especially about things too important for me to resolve alone." "And does it work? Remember when I told you not to close the contract with Megaship last year?" "I remember. You said you had a bad feeling about them." "Megaship went bankrupt 3 months later. If we had closed, we would have lost $3.2 million. Daniel remembered perfectly. At the time, mathematically, the contract made complete sense. But Sandra had insisted that something wasn't right, and he had trusted her. "Sandra, are you telling me that bad feeling came from prayer?" "I'm saying that when I pray asking for wisdom for difficult decisions, I receive insights that my mind alone couldn't have." Daniel looked again at the 2 proposals on the table. "Okay, Sandra, suppose I wanted to try this. How does it work? Do you have a prayer manual for desperate CEOs?" Sandra laughed. "There's something better. There's a verse that changed my life. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all." James 1 verse 5. Gives generously to all? Does that include agnostic CEOs who have never prayed in their lives? "Mr. Peterson, the verse makes no restrictions. It just makes a promise. If you need wisdom, you can ask, and God gives generously. Generously means generously, without judgment, without charge, without prerequisites. You ask, he gives." Daniel looked at his watch. 2:30 p.m. In 30 hours, Amazon's offer would expire. In 18 hours, he would have to answer the Arabs. Sandra, if I wanted to try this, how would I start? You'd start by being honest about what you need. I need to know which decision to make. No, Mr. Peterson, that's what you want. What you need is deeper. Daniel thought for a few moments. I need clarity. I need to understand which path will bring more good to more people. I need wisdom to see beyond money and emotions. Now, yes, that's a prayer God can answer. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Marina, his wife. Honey, you need to come home. Now. Marina, I can't. I'm in the middle of a decision that... Daniel, I just left the doctor. I'm pregnant. Daniel's world stopped. Pregnant. His decision wouldn't just affect him, his employees, or even the American economy. It would affect his child's future. And for the first time in 3 days, Daniel knew exactly what he needed to do. He needed to ask for wisdom. Daniel Peterson grew up believing that intelligence and effort were sufficient to solve any problem. Son of a mechanic and a nurse in a small town in Ohio, he was the first in his family to enter university, industrial engineering at Ohio State University, with a full scholarship. During college, he stood out for his exceptional analytical ability. While other classmates guessed answers, Daniel developed complex spreadsheets, analyzed variables, calculated probabilities. Math doesn't lie was his mantra. Data doesn't have emotions. At 23, recently graduated, he was hired as a junior analyst at a consulting firm in Chicago. At 26, he was a manager. At 28, minority partner. At 30, he decided to become an entrepreneur. The idea for Peterson Logistics was born from a simple observation. The United States wasted billions of dollars annually due to logistical inefficiency. Small companies couldn't compete with giants because they didn't have access to intelligent distribution systems. Daniel created a platform that democratized advanced logistics. Small merchants could use the same algorithms that Amazon used for a price that fit their budget. The company took off. In 5 years, it went from 2 partners working in a garage in Austin to 300 employees in 5 states. Daniel was on the cover of Forbes magazine as Young Entrepreneur of the Year. He gave lectures at universities about data-driven entrepreneurship. He met Marina at one of these lectures at the University of Texas. She was a math professor, doctoral candidate in applied statistics. Love at first sight, not just romantic, but intellectual. They talked about algorithms like other couples talked about movies. They married in 2022 in a small and rational ceremony. Honeymoon in Boston, visiting MIT. They planned to have children when the company was consolidated. Daniel estimated this would happen in 2025. Life was perfectly predictable, mathematically optimized, until the problems began. First, it was a recession of 2023, which Daniel hadn't foreseen in his projections. Then, 3 major clients canceled contracts in the same week, decisions that his risk analysis models indicated as highly improbable. The final blow came in March, a sophisticated cyber attack that destroyed customer data and resulted in million-dollar fines for privacy violations. Daniel had invested in cybersecurity, but not enough for government-level attacks, as the experts classified them. In 6 months, Peterson Logistics went from promising company to company in judicial recovery. Daniel discovered that his philosophy of data doesn't have emotions worked well in stable markets, but was insufficient for navigating complex crises with multiple unpredictable variables. That's when the 2 proposals arrived. Amazon's offer was tempting for obvious reasons: immediate money, financial security, international recognition. Daniel will become Amazon's regional director, with a salary of $800,000 annually. But it meant the end of Peterson as an independent American company. It meant firing 200 to 300 employees, resource optimization, corporate euphemism for people who became redundant. It meant that his technology, developed to democratize logistics, would become just another asset of a corporate giant. The Arab offer was more complex. Khalil al-Rashid represented an investment fund from Qatar that was interested in expanding operations in North America. They offered $20 million. Daniel would maintain operational control. All employees would be kept. But there were warning signs. In the 2 meetings they had, Khalil asked strange questions about capacity to transport sensitive materials and operational discretion. When Daniel asked for details about what kind of products they would transport, the answer was vague. Various commercial materials that require special care. Daniel wasn't naive. He suspected that part of the operations would involve smuggling, perhaps not drugs, but definitely products that preferred to avoid rigorous Homeland Security inspections. For 3 days, Daniel analyzed the proposals from every possible angle. He created spreadsheets comparing risks and benefits, projected 5-year scenarios, consulted lawyers, accountants, market analysts. All data pointed to the same conclusion. Mathematically, both offers were superior to the company's current situation. But for the first time in his life, Daniel realized that data was insufficient, because the decision wasn't just mathematical, it was moral, ethical, existential. And for this type of decision, his engineering training hadn't prepared him. Daniel arrived home at 6:30 p.m. and found Marina sitting on the sofa, holding an envelope. "It's the blood test," she said, smiling through tears. 8 weeks. Daniel sat beside his wife and held her hands. "Marina, this changes everything." "How so?" "The decisions I need to make, they're not just about us two anymore. They're about our child." "Daniel, what decisions?" For the next hour, Daniel told Marina everything. The company situation, the 2 offers, the impossible deadlines, the implications of each choice. "Honey," said Marina when he finished, "you're telling me you need to choose between selling our company to Amazon or partner with possible smugglers in less than 24 hours? Brutally summarizing, yes." Marina was silent for several minutes, processing the information. "Daniel, can I ask a question?" "Sure." "In all this analysis you did you consider a third option?" "What third option?" "Refusing both offers and finding a way to save the company while maintaining your integrity." Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in the laugh. "Marina, you saw the numbers. We have $12 million in debt, negative cash flow, and losing $200,000 per month. Without external investment, we close in 2 months. What if there's a way you can't see alone?" "What do you mean?" "Daniel, during all these years, I've always admired your analytical ability, but you have a limitation. You can only analyze variables you know." "So what? What if there are variables you don't know? Solutions that your logical mind can't calculate?" Daniel looked at his wife. "Marina, are you talking about what? Miracles?" "I'm talking about wisdom that comes from outside your data set." "You mean religion?" "I mean humility. Humility to admit that maybe you need help that doesn't come from spreadsheets or consultants." Daniel stood up and began walking around the room. "Marina, you know my history. I grew up in a family that believed hard work and intelligence solved everything. I never needed external help. And how is that working now?" The question hit Daniel like a punch. "It's not working. Then maybe it's time to try something different." "Marina, I don't even know how to ask God for help. That seems like intellectual dishonesty." "Daniel, intellectual dishonesty is pretending your mind has all the answers when it clearly doesn't." At that moment, Daniel's cell phone rang. It was Sandra. "Mr. Peterson, sorry to call home, but an email arrived from Amazon. They're willing to negotiate. They increased the offer to $100 million, but want an answer by tomorrow at 10 a.m. Daniel hung up the phone and looked at Marina. $100 million. With that money, we pay all debts, guarantee our child's future, and I never have to worry about money again. And you would lose the company you built, fire 200 employees, and hand over your technology to a corporate monopoly. Marina, from a rational standpoint. Daniel, stop it. Stop trying to rationalize a decision that goes beyond reason." It was the first time in 2 years of marriage that Marina had yelled at him. "Daniel, you're pregnant with fear. Fear of failing. Fear of losing everything. Fear of not being smart enough to solve this alone. And that fear is clouding your judgment." Daniel sat heavily on the sofa. "Marina, if I make the wrong decision. If you make any decision based only on fear, it's already the wrong decision. So what do you suggest? I suggest you do what you've never done in your life. Ask for help. From whom? From whoever has wisdom you don't have. Marina, are you talking about God? I'm talking about any source of wisdom that's bigger than your scared brain. Daniel looked at his wife, brilliant, logical, rational, suggesting he pray. Marina, do you believe in God? Daniel, right now, I believe we need wisdom we don't have. And if that wisdom comes from God, the universe, or our collective intuition, frankly, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we need it. And how do we ask? We start by admitting we don't know everything. That night, Daniel did something completely outside his behavioral pattern. He knelt beside the bed and tried to pray. God, or whoever is listening, I don't know if you exist. I never needed to know, but now I need wisdom I don't have. I need to make decisions that will affect hundreds of people, including my child who hasn't been born yet. If you can help me, please help me see beyond what my mind can calculate. There were no lightning bolts, voices, or visions, but Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in months. Calm. A calm that made no statistical sense. Daniel slept deeply for the first time in weeks. He woke up at 6:30 a.m., not with an alarm, but naturally, with a mental clarity he hadn't felt in months. During his shower, an idea began to form, not a logical idea, derived from analysis. A complete intuition, as if someone had whispered a solution in his ear during sleep. He arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m. Sandra was already there, as always. Good morning, Mr. Peterson. How was the night? Sandra, can I tell you something strange? Sure. I prayed. Sandra smiled. And I woke up with an idea. I don't know where it came from. Tell me, what if we don't sell to Amazon or accept the Arabs? What if there's a third option I wasn't seeing? What option? Daniel took a blank sheet and began drawing a diagram. Sandra, our company is broken because we lost big clients, right? But what if the problem isn't client size, but business model? Continue. What if instead of selling logistics to companies, we start selling participation in results? How so? Instead of charging for the service, we charge percentage of the sales increase we generate. If the client doesn't sell more, we don't earn anything. If they sell much more, we win together. Sandra stopped typing and stared at Daniel. Mr. Peterson, this is revolutionary. It would transform Peterson from service provider to business partner. Exactly. And you know what's best? We wouldn't need external capital. We would need credibility with clients. But how does this solve the cash flow problem? Simple. We offer the new model to 50 small and medium entrepreneurs in the region. If we increase their sales by an average of 30%, which is what our historical data shows, our 10% participation in results would cover our operational costs in 6 months. Sandra was silent, processing the math, and the $12 million in debt. We negotiate with creditors instead of immediate liquidation. We offer participation in future profits. They earn more in the long term. We gain time to execute the new model. Mr. Peterson, where did this idea come from? Honestly, I don't know. I woke up with it ready in my head. Sandra smiled. Mr. Peterson, that's an answered prayer. How are you sure? Because it's a solution that benefits everyone involved, you, the employees, the clients, even the creditors. That's the kind of wisdom God gives, win-win solutions. Daniel looked at the spreadsheet he had created during the night. Mathematically, the new model was risky. It required mutual trust between company and clients. It depended on Peterson's ability to actually deliver results. But it had something the other options didn't have: integrity. Sandra, call Amazon. I'm going to refuse the offer. Are you sure? Absolutely. And then call Khalil. I'm also going to refuse. What if the new model doesn't work? Then we go bankrupt trying to do the right thing, instead of getting rich doing the wrong thing. At 9:30 a.m., Daniel called Amazon director, Mr. Miller. Thank you for the generous proposal. but I've decided to keep the company American and independent. Mr. Peterson, it's $100 million. Are you sure? Why? Because I felt it was the right thing to do. Marina laughed. Daniel Peterson, the man who only made decisions based on spreadsheets, is refusing millions based on feelings? Not feelings, Marina. Wisdom. There's a difference. What difference? Feelings are emotional and temporary. Wisdom is spiritual and lasting. Daniel, you're becoming a completely different person. Better or worse? Much better. That afternoon, something extraordinary happened. Daniel received a call from Robert Silva from the National Small Business Association. Mr. Peterson, I heard you refuse another millionaire proposal today. Word travels fast. When someone is making history, yes, Mr. Peterson, I'd like to invite you to be keynote speaker at our national conference in September. About what? About ethical leadership in the American market. About how it's possible to be successful without compromising values. Daniel was silent. 6 months ago, he was desperate to save his company. Now, he was being invited to teach other entrepreneurs. Mr. Silva, can I be honest? I don't know if I have authority to speak about this subject. I'm still learning. Mr. Peterson, that humility is exactly why you're the right person. America is tired of arrogant CEOs who pretend to have all the answers. We need leaders who admit they're learning, but have the courage to make right choices. After hanging up, Daniel was thoughtful. A national speech would mean visibility, networking, possibility of new business. But it also meant responsibility, being an example for other entrepreneurs. God, he prayed quietly, if you want me to speak to other businessmen, you need to give me wisdom not just for my company, but to teach principles that work universally. 2 weeks later, Daniel received a call that would change his perspective on his company's purpose. Mr. Peterson, this is Michael Chun, CEO of Chun Electronics in San Francisco. I heard about your story through the Wall Street Journal. How can I help you? Mr. Peterson, my company is facing a situation similar to what you faced. 2 offers, one to sell to a Chinese corporation, another for partnership with investors who have questionable ethical issues. And I want to know how you found courage to refuse millions and find a third option. Daniel realized this wasn't just a business consultation. It was a request for spiritual mentorship disguised as a business call. Mr. Chun, can I ask a personal question? Sure. Have you ever considered that maybe you're facing this crisis not by chance, but by purpose? How so? Maybe God is preparing you to discover leadership principles you never developed in prosperity. There was silence on the other side of the line. Mr. Peterson, are you religious? I'm a businessman who discovered that business wisdom and spiritual wisdom are inseparable. Did that work for you? Mr. Chun, 3 months ago my company was going bankrupt. Today we're growing 15% per month. I have a waiting list of clients, and I received an invitation to speak at a national conference. This didn't happen by accident. What did you do differently? I started asking for wisdom from someone smarter than me. Michael Chun was silent for almost a minute. Mr. Peterson, would you accept being my mentor? Not just business mentor, but spiritual mentor? Daniel felt something he now recognized as divine confirmation, an internal peace that indicated alignment with greater purpose. Mr. Chun, can I suggest something? How about we create a group of Christian CEOs that meets monthly to share challenges, pray together, and develop biblical principles of business leadership? You would do that? I believe God is calling me to this. 6 weeks later, Daniel was hosting the first meeting of what will be called Executive Prayer Breakfast at an Austin hotel. 7 CEOs from different states had attended. Michael Chun Electronics, Sarah Williams Software, James Rodriguez Construction, Lisa Thompson Consulting, David Park Biotechnology, Amanda Foster Education, and Thomas Mueller Agriculture. Folks, Daniel began, we're all here because we discovered that business success without spiritual foundation is unsustainable. Sarah Williams raised her hand. Daniel, can I share something? 2 years ago, my software company was billing $50 million annually. I was miserable, my employees were burnout, my marriage was ending. Success metrics were great, but life metrics were horrible. What changed? Asked James Rodriguez. I started praying, asking for wisdom for decisions. Not just big decisions, but daily decisions. How to treat employees, how to structure projects, how to balance profit and people. And did it work? Asked Lisa Thompson. It worked in ways I never imagined. Revenue temporarily dropped to $35 million, but employee satisfaction increased 60%. My marriage was restored, and now we're growing sustainably. Daniel looked around the table. Sarah, you discovered what I discovered. God cares about our businesses, not just our souls. Exactly, agreed Michael Chin. For years, I thought spirituality and business were separate compartments. I discovered that when I integrate both improve dramatically. Folks, said Daniel, can I propose something? How about we create practical business principles based on biblical wisdom? For the next 3 hours, the group developed what will be known as the Austin Principles. Seek wisdom before profit. James 1 verse 5 applied to business decisions. Treat employees as partners, not resources. Biblical principles of servant leadership. Choose integrity over opportunity. Daniel refusing questionable offers. Share success with stakeholders. Results participation model. Use business as ministry. Companies as instruments of social transformation. Folks, said Daniel at the end of the meeting, I believe we're creating something that can transform American business culture. How so? Asked Amanda Foster. Imagine if hundreds of American CEOs started making decisions based on wisdom, not just data. Imagine the impact on economy, society, our nation. Thomas Mueller leaned forward. Daniel, are you talking about business revival? I'm talking about discovering that God has opinions about how we do business. And when we align with those opinions, everything works better. 6 months after the first meeting, the executive prayer breakfast had expanded to 15 American cities. More than 200 CEOs participated monthly. Daniel was in his office on a December morning when Sandra entered with an expression of incredulity. Mr. Peterson, you need to see this. What is it? Forbes wants to do a cover story about you. Title: The CEO Who Started a Spiritual Revolution in American Business. Daniel read the email twice. Sandra, this is surreal. Mr. Peterson, do you remember when you prayed asking for wisdom to save your company? Of course. You asked for wisdom for your company. God gave wisdom for American business. How so? God didn't just save Peterson Logistics. He used Peterson as a catalyst to transform how hundreds of CEOs think about leadership. Daniel looked out the window. Outside, Austin was busy with the morning rush. Thousands of people go to work at companies led by leaders who, for the most part, made decisions based only on profit and competition. Sandra, do you think we can really impact American business culture? Mr. Peterson, a year ago you were desperate, ready to accept any offer to save your company. Today you have CEOs from coast to coast asking for spiritual mentorship. If that's not God working, I don't know what is. That afternoon, Daniel received a call that surprised him completely. Mr. Peterson, this is Jeff Bezos. Mr. Bezos, what a surprise. Daniel, I heard you're leading a spiritual leadership movement in business. I'd like to talk personally. About what? About how to apply these principles on a large scale. Amazon has 1.3 million employees. If we can implement wisdom-based leadership at the corporate level, imagine the impact. Daniel was speechless for a few seconds. Mr. Bezos, are you inviting me to mentor spiritual principles at Amazon? I'm inviting you to consider that maybe God had prepared you for a bigger stage than you imagined. That night, Daniel arrived home visibly emotional. Marina was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, with her 6-month pregnant belly. Honey, how was the day? Marina, Jeff Bezos called. Jeff Bezos? The Jeff Bezos. He wants me to consider developing a spiritual leadership program for Amazon executives. Marina stopped cooking. Daniel, this is massive. It is, and I'm completely overwhelmed. Why? Because a year ago, I was just a desperate CEO trying to save my small company. Now I'm being invited to influence the leadership culture of the world's largest corporation. Marina approached and held his hands. Daniel, do you remember when you prayed asking for wisdom to make decisions about Amazon's and the Arabs' offers? Of course. You asked for wisdom for decisions that would affect hundreds of people, including our unborn child. Yes. What if God heard your prayer, but had much bigger plans than just saving Peterson Logistics? Daniel looked at his wife. You think this is all connected? Daniel, you refused $100 million from Amazon because you felt God calling you to a different path. Now Amazon is calling you to help them find spiritual wisdom. If that's not divine orchestration, I don't know what is. That night, Daniel did something that had become natural. He knelt beside the bed and prayed. God, a year ago I was desperate, asking for wisdom to save my small company. Now I'm being asked to help transform American business culture. I feel completely unprepared and overwhelmed. He paused, waiting for the peace that always came when he prayed sincerely. But I also feel that same sense of rightness I felt when I refused the questionable offers. If you are opening this door, I trust that you will give me wisdom to walk through it. The next day, Daniel called Jeff Bezos. Mr. Bezos, I accept your proposal, but with one condition. What condition? That we can start with a small pilot program. 20 executives, 6 months, implementing the awesome principles I developed with my CEO group. And if it works, we expand gradually. But with the understanding that spiritual transformation can't be rushed or forced. It has to be authentic. Deal, Daniel. When can we start? Mr. Bezos, can I make one more request? Sure, that we can begin each meeting with prayer. Not preaching, not evangelizing. Just asking for wisdom to make decisions that benefit all stakeholders, employees, customers, shareholders, society. There was silence for a few seconds. Daniel, in 40 years of business, I never thought I'd agree to pray in corporate meetings. But you prove that spiritual wisdom works. Let's try. 2 years later, Daniel was standing on the stage of the largest business conference in the United States, about to give a keynote speech to 5,000 American CEOs. The theme, from desperation to transformation, how spiritual wisdom revolutionized my business. He looked at the packed auditorium. Hundreds of entrepreneurs who had come to hear about the integration of faith and business. Folks, he began, 3 years ago, I was in the same situation many of you are in, facing impossible decisions, overwhelmed by complexity, relying only on my own intelligence. The audience was silent, attentive. I learned something that changed everything. When we admit we need wisdom greater than our own, and when we humbly ask for that wisdom, we receive not just answers to our immediate problems. We receive vision for impact we never imagined. Daniel paused, seeing Sandra in front row, smiling proudly. Peterson Logistics started as a small company trying to survive. Today, through God's grace, it's part of a movement that is transforming how American business leaders think about success, integrity, and purpose. He looked up, sending a silent prayer. James 1 verse 5 promises, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all. This isn't just a promise for personal life. It's a promise for business life, for leadership, for every decision that affects other people. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Later, backstage, Marina approached with her 1-year-old son, David Peterson. How does it feel, she asked, to know that your desperate prayer 3 years ago started a movement that's impacting thousands of business leaders? Daniel took his son in his arms and looked into the innocent eyes that reminded him that legacy isn't just about business success. Feels like God knew what he was doing even when I didn't. And now I understand that when we seek God's wisdom liberally, he gives not just wisdom for our situations. He gives wisdom that multiplies, impacts others, and creates change much greater than anything we could plan ourselves. Little David grabbed Daniel's tie and smiled. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. James 1 verse 5. Daniel discovered that God truly gives wisdom generously, without judgment, without restrictions, without prerequisites. But he also discovered that divine wisdom rarely comes as a simple answer. It comes as expanded vision, as courage for ethical choices, as strength to persevere when human logic says to give up. Most importantly, he discovered that when we use divine wisdom not just for our problems, but to serve others, God multiplies both the wisdom and the impact. What impossible decision are you facing today? What situation needs wisdom greater than your own capacity? Remember, God gives generously. Just ask with sincerity and act with courage. So, did this story move you too? Look, if you know someone going through a difficult situation like this, send this story to that person. Sometimes it's exactly what they need to hear today. And go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way you'll always know about new stories. Tell me in the comments, what part moved you the most? I read all the comments and love knowing how these stories touch you. Until the next video, everyone, and don't forget this: do your best today